as far as being creative, having an artistic outlet, perhaps doesn't necessarily have to be an artistic outlet, but having something that genuinely brings you joy. I think that maybe that's a big part of this, is like, what is something that is joyful that you're not doing in your life because you're telling yourself that it's not important.
This is Way of the Artist with Brandon Colby Cook and Evan Schulte.
Identifying your blocks and demystifying your struggles
so that you can claim your own path
and make your life a work of art.
All right. Another podcast, another day, another podcast, another topic, some more stuff about art and creativity. This is Brandon and Evan. And well, this is important, isn't it? Evan's just cracking up with my weird little intro. But hey, guys, welcome to the podcast. We are going to talk a little bit about finding time for your art, really. Find time to be creative. And I think that this is something that we can all relate to in a way, because don't you find that your creative impulses and your art and your ideas and all that stuff, they kind of get pushed to the bottom or to the shelf or to the back because you got
side.
Life. Yeah, to the side somewhere. Anyway, they get pushed away.
It gets pushed.
Yeah. You don't pull it in. You don't deal with it. You don't look at it. But it's like life is, stressful, emotional. There's things that you got to keep up with. There's bills you got to pay. You come home from work, maybe you're exhausted. You got kids, maybe a partner. Maybe other things you got to deal with in life. And this thing that is actually really important, if you just gave it attention and energy, and you fleshed it out and worked with it, it would be really important. But we have this way of treating some of that stuff like it isn't. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to get into it, and we'll see what happens. What are your thoughts, Evan?
Yeah, no, I loved that intro. It just got me just right, Brandon. I think that this is, in many ways, it might be a really nice little companion episode to one that we did a little while ago called Finding Your Way Back to Art. But I think this conversation that we're having today is, while there's a relationship, there's something different that we're focusing on with this one, namely, this is important, and taking a look at and examining the things that we do push off. As you said, like, this isn't important, these other things have priority, and and certainly there are moments where, there's something that we have to address. But normally those things are pretty, like, when we have those moments in our life, they're immediate. They're knowable. We're usually already in the midst of taking action in something when we have a situation like that. I think that most of us in the modern world, we're not in that situation most of the time. Every now and then we are, but most of the time we're not. I think that maybe part of the problem that we're addressing in this conversation is that the problem is that we think we're in that space. The problem is that we think that we're in that thing. It's like, oh, this has to take priority. This has to take priority. I have to do this. And getting stuck in sort of the doldrums of, just day-to-day expectations, I guess, expectations that we think that we're supposed to be meeting to be an upstanding citizen of our, respective society. And maybe it's not so much. And yeah, I'm interested in, like, let's explore a little bit of why don't we see these creative things, these curiosities that we have? How come we don't think that these things are important? And I would also say that we talked about potentially calling this episode the least important is the most important. And just because sometimes doing something that might seem really unimportant, that might seem it's frivolous, there's no time for that because that's an extra. Well, maybe it isn't as much as an extra as you think it is. Maybe it is actually the most important thing for you to be doing right now. And by allowing yourself to do it, it might actually help you with doing these other things that you have on your, list of things that you have to meet.
Yeah, there's the keeping up with life. I think one of the biggest things for most people is they have these things that are like paying their bills, or they're behind, or it's I think the other thing too is when we do like a job or we work for someone else, when we work a job, we're in some way subjugating what's important to us to do what's important for someone else. And I think sometimes when you're in a relationship or a marriage, or you have children, or anything like that, there's a certain amount of subjugating what you want to do, what's important to you, to kind of meet the needs and demands of what someone else wants or something else needs. And I think there is a value in that. I think it's virtuous to, in certain ways, to make sure you take care of your responsibilities and make sure those are met.
Yeah.
There's also a certain amount of like, you have a responsibility to yourself. And I don't always think that people acknowledge that, where it's important to take time to nurture you. And that's not just nurturing how you feel, which I think is probably for some people the only way they do it. They're just nurturing how they feel, and that's it. And by nurturing how they feel, it's just to feel better or to not feel something. So they might say watch a show or play some video games or have a drink, have a smoke, eat a nice meal. These things, I'm not saying that you don't want to do them, and I'm not saying that they're not important in their own way. But if your only way of self kind of appreciation and self-value comes from just getting away from a feeling or trying to get to a feeling, I think you're greatly limiting what you are, and you're not actually fully valuing yourself. So I think that's an element of this conversation which kind of needs to be brought in. You can look at your creative impulses and your bigger dreams and things like that as it's like a responsibility you have to yourself to nurture. And it's not always going to feel good. I mean, I'll tell you guys, like, I've written for over 3,300 days, something like that now. I forget. I just lose track. I just keep doing it every day, and I just mark down a number. I don't even look anymore. But some days it sucks. Some days writing is just like, oh my God, why am I doing this? And I still got, like, I committed for 10 years. So I still got like most of a year left now to finish off this agreement. And I've made a long way. I've made it 9 years now, over 9 years. And I'm just like, oh man. But the thing is that there's a important part of this discipline, which is that it's a responsibility I have to myself. And sometimes I don't want to write, and writing doesn't feel good that day. It doesn't happen every day, but some days it's like that. Some days I'm tired. Some days I just want to do something else. Sometimes I just don't want to take myself away from something to do it. And I've developed a certain amount of discipline around it, which has been very helpful. And I think that part of this conversation is about going like, can you make something important in your life that's for you, that values you and builds you, and not keep putting it to the side, not keep putting it in the background. Mm-hmm. So I think that, this is something we're all trying to navigate. We're all trying to figure it out. And I don't think you have to always give in to the pressures of the world and everybody else. You don't always have to make your whole life being like kind of a servitude to someone else. Part of it is serving your own soul, your own spirit, your own self, your own creative being, whatever you want to call it. But give it a little bit of space, give it a stage, give it something.
Absolutely. I think that a lot of people listening there's probably a lot of people who are familiar with this idea of, sometimes you have to you have to take care of yourself before you can take care of anyone else. Like that's seems to be a fairly common idea that we have around there, like, and I guess a very extreme example of that, but is one that we recognize as a logical thing to do in our society is like on a plane, if the pressure it leaves the plane, your job is to put your mask on first before you assist anyone else, right? Because you're no good to anyone if you're passed out, right? Like and you can't help even though, and that's the most vulnerable people.
Yeah.
They're saying, yes, there are people who are more vulnerable than you, but if something happens to you, you can't do shit for them. So put your mask on first, right? And so this is sort of like, put your mask on first. Put some of these things in your life that you're putting off in the front seat every now and then. Try and create some more space for that and start to understand it as being more important. One, like in my own life recently, and it's still something that I have to constantly tell myself to do. Like I've gotten, you've had this writing practice for a long time. I've had a meditation practice for, not consistently for as long as that, but, but, on and off for a number of years. And over the last number of years, it's definitely been a lot more consistent. But I still battle sometimes with my mind saying, oh, well, that's not an important thing for you to do right now. It's important that you check your email again, or it's important that you, advertise something, or it's important that you, take on, get this task done, that never ending task list that we always have in our life. There's a never ending task list of just day-to-day things that, yeah, we have to do these things, but they're given such a space of importance that I don't think they're deserving of. And meditation is one of those things where it's like I had for a long time been treating it as, okay, this is something important to me, but was something that was something I did over here. It's like, okay, that's something extra that you do, and really making it more of a mindfully important thing to do, where I actually say to myself and remind myself, Evan, this is the most important thing for you to do today. Like these times that you've scheduled to sit down and meditate, even if it's only for 5 minutes, that's the most important thing for you to do. There is nothing else that's more important than this. And that definitely helps me to like get going and doing that. But what's amazing is that it doesn't actually stop me from handling the tasks that are still required of me for the day. You know what I mean? Like there's time for all of it, right? And maybe there's a task that doesn't get done that day, but normally it's something that doesn't have to get done that day, and then it usually gets done the next day. You know what I mean? Like it's and when you're in a position like that, it's like, oh yeah, maybe this wasn't as vital to my existence as I thought it was to, unload the dishwasher today, or some menial task like that, right? But yeah, sometimes and I often find that like when I allow myself and go and I do my meditations and stuff like that, like it's when I am going about my tasks, I'm doing it from a completely different space. Like I'm calmer, I'm more clear-headed. I have even more of a sense sometimes of joy and appreciation. Like sometimes I find that like I'm doing a task and I have a greater understanding of who I am in service to, whether it's to my family, my friends, to my clients, like there's a greater sense of that comes through it. So I mean, that's with a specific thing in my life in meditation, but as far as being creative, having an artistic outlet, perhaps doesn't necessarily have to be an artistic outlet, but having something that genuinely brings you joy. I think that maybe that's a big part of this, is like, what is something that is joyful that you're not doing in your life because you're telling yourself that it's not important.
I think it's important to remind yourself that it's joyful, because I think that sometimes this stuff can feel like work, or it can feel like this hard thing to do. I know for writing, it can be like that some days, where it's like, well, why am I writing? It's like, well, I like to write. I like doing it. I actually want to do it. But some days, it doesn't feel like that. And, I mean, for example, I have a client right now, and she's a really, really quite a talented writer, but she struggles with the discipline of writing, and so I've been giving her some practices, to try and like develop her writing disciplines and things like that, and just kind of coach her through that. And it's interesting because when she gets going, she loves doing it. But getting going is so hard for her. It's just such a hard thing. Yeah. And we all have this, like we all relate to that, right? It's like going from neutral to first gear is just such a hard shift in so many things in life. And I don't know what it is about it, but I can totally relate to it. It's like you build up in your mind, oh, like I got nothing to write about. It's going to be so hard. I'd really just be rather doing this. There's all of that going on. And I think with something like this, maybe that's the mantra, this is important. So let's just do it. Let's just do it and not think about what it'll feel like, not think about what it's putting off. It's important, and that's all I need to know. So I'm going to do it. And I would dare to say that most things, if you just get started, you'll probably find out that they're not so bad, that they're a lot easier than you think. And then once you're doing it, you probably start to realize, like, why don't I do this all the time?
Yeah.
And it's a very difficult shift. It's a very difficult shift from neutral to first gear. And I think one thing I'm reminded of all the time, it's funny how I said I think, because I'm about to say, is don't think so much. Don't think about it. Like that was a little piece of advice I got when I was younger, is like, don't think, just do it. When it comes to stuff like this, don't even think, just go and do the thing that's important. Just go and do it. And you'll think about it while you're doing it. And that's enough. The thinking about it is part of the problem. All the justification and the story and the narrative and all the things that we build around it, like what might go wrong, all this other stuff. You got to get in the habit of not doing that. Just be like, okay, the moment you have the thought, okay, I want to do this creative thing, you go and you do it. Just go and do it. Don't worry about it. Don't think about it. And if it's writing, then you just sit down and you start writing. That's it. Just sit down, pen and paper, whatever, keyboard, whatever you do. Pen and paper is actually, I would actually say that's even better. Just as a writer, I would say early on, pen and paper is very helpful to like the physical part of writing on paper. There's something really tangible and nice about that you'll probably find a huge reward out of. There is a disconnect I find through the keyboard. I've done it for so long now that I feel like I've kind of moved past that, but I think going back to writing with pen and paper is actually a really, really effective thing, just about writing. When it comes to maybe like music or acting, I mean, maybe it's pick up the instrument. Maybe it's, read something about learning about it, just do something, put some energy towards this thing that you care about, whatever it is. Yeah.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to, like, we talk all the time on this show about just like keeping it something simple. I often encourage people to make that first step something that seems so trivially small, but actually take some sort of a small action in getting it done. Like just you want to write a story, well, write, like pull out a piece of paper, like a pad of paper, and write the title at the top. Doesn't matter if that's not going to be the final title. Write your working title up at the top of the page. That's something. That
Totally.
action sets something into motion within yourself and within the universe, perhaps. But it's something like it gets you, as you said, into that first gear, which is such a hard thing to do. And like I was just thinking, like, one practice that I fell out of and I have started redoing again recently is a very simple practice, because I'm one of those people who, for most of my life, I've always hated uh, having to write down goals and stuff like that. What are your goals? And it's usually something that has given me a lot of anxiety in my life. And I came up with sort of an idea, which was an amalgamation of a couple of useful things that I got from different people through the years. And it's a simple practice, and I believe I've talked about this on the show before, but I call it 3 wins to win the day. And basically every single day, and again, I keep it simple. I just have a small yellow legal pad, basically, that I use as this. I write the day on it, and I write down 3 things that would be wins for me that day.
Mm.
What would be a win? And the thing that I like about the wording of that, for me, but because the wording of it is very important. They're not goals, they're not targets, they're not whatever. I mean, yes, I guess on some level they are, but for me, it's like the win. I say win because for me, it's an emotional response. It's an emotion. It's just like, you check that thing off, that's a win. You just wanted that, right? And it also helps me to connect to things that are actually important. You know what I mean? Like, it actually helps me to realize and understand for that day what is actually important. And then I often do the same thing for like the week or the month. Okay, well, what would be one big win this month? What would be one big win this week? Right? And it kind of, I don't know, it gives me a sense of excitement about it. But because, again, everything that I'm writing down is something that has an emotional energy to it, of being like, yeah, that's a win. There's an excitement. There's an energy behind doing that thing. And my whole thing with that as well is like, it can be in any realm of your life. It can be within your career. It can be within your relationship. It can be even in leisure. Like a win for, sometimes a win for me is sit down and watch a movie by yourself this afternoon. Right? And it's just like, yeah, that would be a win, because sometimes that's what I need. I think that's another thing that's really great about it, is like the win will also tell you what a need that you have. I think it also reflects a need that when we use the word need, sometimes it's hard to know what that is. Or like, I don't know what I need. I don't know, what do I need right now? Maybe that works for some people, but for me, it doesn't work that way. Win works for me that way. It shows me what at my core is needed in my life that day, in that moment. And then I also say, it's like, and once you've done you've had your 3 wins for the day, then you've won the day.
Yeah.
You've won the day. And I often say, like, then do whatever you want. After, it's like when you've had your 3 wins, like when you get to your 3 wins, then do whatever you want for the rest of the day.
I think that's a really good way to look at it.
Yeah.
I think it's good to get a little bit organized about what you could do in the day that would be a win. And actually, a practice that I've learned is that if you decide the night before what you're going to do the next day for a win, or your wins that you need for the next day or that you are going for, you get up with a certain sense of purpose and clarity, and you actually schedule it in and make time for it. So instead of trying to figure it out, like when you get home from work, or something like that, which is like late in the afternoon, you're tired, maybe you've for even the evening, and you're just kind of worn out. And then it's like, okay, like I need to do this thing that, and then it's like, yeah, but it'd be nice to just have a beer and watch the tube. It's kind of like, this thing of like, in some ways you need to get momentum. And I think that's such an important thing. It's like when you don't have any momentum, all of this stuff just seems so hard. When you get momentum going, these things they're not nearly as difficult. And it's easy to fall off track and lose momentum, so just having momentum is not, there's other challenges that come with keeping up with it. But, getting momentum is the first step. So what can you do? I mean, if you said, okay, well, I got to move 1,000 pounds from here to there, right? Forget it. Let's not even say 1,000 pounds. Let's say 100 pounds. Okay. 100 pounds. Now, some people can take and lift 100 pounds and they can go, okay, I can do this in one haul, right? But it's still 100 pounds. You got to haul it over. The night before, if you lifted 20, 30 of those pounds, you kind of got a little bit of it out of the way. The next day, it's only 70 pounds, right? And then if you kind of chunked it, maybe you did a little in the morning, you did a little in the evening, it wouldn't be so bad. It would be kind of like, okay, and now it'd be these like little easy lifts from getting one thing over to the next. Yeah. And you could get yourself to the point where, maybe you can only do 100 pounds. Maybe you can only do 10 pounds. I'm just using a kind of analogy here, but you could get yourself to the point where you could do 1,000 pounds or 10,000 pounds. You know what I mean? Where you get to the point where you have the capacity, the momentum, the discipline, the way of managing this stuff so it doesn't seem so overwhelming. And I think what's really important is that people think that 5 minutes doesn't matter. And that's something that I just have to say, like, it matters a lot. 5 minutes matters incredibly. And if you just do 5 minutes and even if you stop after 5 minutes, you've still done something so important. You might look at it and go, well, if you're writing, for example, you've got 5 minutes. I mean, how much writing am I going to get done in 5 minutes? Well, you might be surprised. You might actually get a lot done, but you did some writing, which is important. So then you've already written. So the next time you go to write, you've already done a little bit of writing. So you have a little bit of momentum towards writing, and you do another 5 minutes, you do another whatever. It won't be long until you get to the point where you can do 10 or 15 or 30. And then you might have these days where, you write for an hour and you have this really good day, and then you go back and you write for 5 or 10 minutes. But I know things shifted for me after I was doing this writing every day. And I think initially, before I committed to half an hour every day, I initially started with 15 minutes a day. And I did 15 minutes a day about 2 or 3 times. And I dropped the ball at some point. I think I dropped the ball at 30 something days once or something like that. And I know I dropped the ball around like 70 days or somewhere around there. And then my rule was, if I drop the ball, I got to restart and start counting from day one again, because I dropped the ball. But when I started, it was only 15 minutes. But then when I finally got to this commitment that I've been doing for over 3,000 days, it was a 30-minute commitment. And I do 30 minutes every day, no matter what. And some days I'll do more, some days I'll do an hour, some days I'll do 2, some days I'll do 3. But I remember when I was really writing and I had the time, I remember doing days that were like 16-hour days of writing. I want you to wrap your head around that. Like 16 hours a day. That means I went to sleep, I woke up, and I wrote from the moment I woke up until the moment I went to sleep. And I went back to sleep, and then I got back up and I wrote from the moment I woke up to the, like, I don't know if many people understand what that is actually like. You have to be transcendent of work at that point. You have to be at a point where you have so much momentum and so much focus and so much clarity that you can actually maintain and sustain the energy to do that for that long. And this is the thing, is like all those 15-minute exercises I did, they added up to being able to do 30 every day, but they also added up to being able to do 16-hour days of writing if necessary. And, if someone said, okay, like, you have 1 week and it's going to take 16 hours of writing every single day for an entire week, and I had to do it, I could do it. Like, I know I can. I built the discipline around that. I built the focus state around that, the stuff that you need, but it starts small. So I'm just saying, like, when something's important, don't underestimate the fact that all you can do is a few minutes. It's fine. You got to start somewhere. It starts with a step. And I think that a lot of people talk themselves out of doing anything because, they just say, oh, well, it doesn't matter. It won't make a difference. And I'm telling you, it does. It does make a difference. And, you might not go from 5 minutes to 16 hours in the next day or the next week or the next month, or maybe it'll even take you a year. But if you just put in a little bit of time, it'll add up, and you'll get better, and you'll build a confidence, and you'll build a fluidity and a certain momentum. And I think that's an important thing about making something important, is that you look at it in terms of like, okay, well, I might not get a lot done, but I'm getting a lot of momentum created. And that's an important element of it too.
Yeah. Yeah. And also what I'm picking up on here as well is that we're working on a process as opposed to necessarily a result. If you, and the thing is when you commit to a process, results come come on their own.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think that that's a backwards thing that we have. We're always like pursuing results, and it fucks up the process.
Totally.
Whereas we're talking about commit to a process, no matter however much you can commit to that process and on a consistent basis, but that process does something. There's something that happens when you begin to take action and engage with something creatively. All sorts of things start to come out, all sorts of surprises, all sorts of spontaneous things happen, which is, that's the juice of creativity. And it doesn't demand really a whole lot of time, because there are times when, being able to really just hammer at something for a long time is going to be part of that process. And there are times when that's not going to be necessary at all. Mm-hmm. There's an exercise that I remember learning from one of my old acting teachers, and it's very much the embodiment of that process. It's kind of a cool little technique where basically, for actors, I'll run you through the Cliff Notes version of it. But basically, when you're reading through a script as an actor, there are certain things that are talked about, mentioned, whatever in the script that have a quality of meaning to them, right? Like a place, a person that maybe is never seen or whatever, but it's something that you have to have some sort of, there's some sort of, it has to have some sort of life to you. It has to have some sense of reality to you. So basically, you go through and you find all of these different things that are referenced to, and just in a book, you write what those different things are at the top of a book. And the way that I learned it was set a timer for, I think it was 60 seconds, for 1 minute. And before you hit the timer, you just stare at whatever the word, the statement what is that you have written at the top, and then just stare at it, read it, hit the start button, and just start writing. Just start writing like as fast as you can. Like just spill your impressions, your feelings, your intuitions, whatever about that thing. And when 60 seconds is up, you stop. Right? And it's that's something that you can go and you can revisit it, right? And you can do the exercise again, and you do another 60 seconds on that thing. What I couldn't believe with this exercise was how effective it was because when the moment came in that scene where that thing comes up, and suddenly there was I had this connection to that thing. There was all of these feelings and impressions and whatever that came alive. for me in those moments, and for everybody else too. And that's working with the process, right? And it wasn't necessarily, what was so interesting about it is that there was no sense of result that was supposed to come out of it. You know, it was just an exercise on just expressing, you know, what your feelings and ideas and thoughts were about that thing then and there, for such a short period of time. But it had such a profound effect, and it affected my own performance in ways that I didn't know that it would. You know, suddenly there was some kind of emotion that was coming out of me that I was like, oh, holy shit, that was not planned. That's never even happened, you know, in reading this or in rehearsal. It was something that just came out of it. Right. So it doesn't, and that comes out of a result of 60 seconds. You know, all of these little beautiful nuances and things can come out of just a committed short period of time, right? But thoughtful, mindful. Yeah, this is really interesting that this has come out in this conversation. But yeah, like I think the focus on process, and I just want to say one more thing as well. Just that I'm realizing as well about the sort of the 3 wins thing that I was talking about, is that is so much about process as well. You know, like the win is really about engaging in a kind of a process that will create all kinds of unknown things in your life, but will begin to can help set you on a trajectory of a life that looks a little bit more of what you would like it to look like. Hey, it's Evan with a quick public service announcement. If you're enjoying the conversation you're hearing and finding it helpful, then please help us and take a second to subscribe to the podcast. And we can all be people helping other people, and that's awesome. Now back to the show. I can't hear you, Brandon.
Oh, you can't hear me? Okay,
there we go. There you are.
I was trying to mute the mic. You guys probably heard all that anyway, because I'm living in the city area, and the sirens and stuff have been going off like crazy. So I was trying to mute it out. But anyway, I did it backwards. What you're saying though, Evan, is it's about building the kind of life you want. And I think that we can drift away into this life that we don't want by taking the things that are actually important and continually putting them on the back burner. And I think one of the things that you're bringing up is kind of, it's important. And I think looking at it like wins, we did talk about this way back in the day. I remember us talking about wins and talking about how you could strategize and use wins as a kind of a thing. But it reminds me of that, and how, you know, there is a way to kind of win your life by not just letting it be kind of dictated to you, you know, where you kind of decide, hey, like, this is the life I want. And the saying like, these are the things that would win the day, are a way of you kind of making, you know, dictating and deciding how your life is going to be and what you're going to look at and what you're going to make important, you know, to put as a priority. I think for me, like, one thing that I'm definitely guilty of these days is, you know, watching too many shows or movies. And I get caught in that sometimes, because I'll justify it, because I'll be like, well, I'm studying this show or I'm studying this movie or whatever to like understand story and characters and structures. But like, honestly, I've gotten to a point now where I've seen so many movies and so many shows, and I've broken so many down, that most of it just becomes pretty standard to me. It's pretty predictable. Like, to give you an example, you know, a few years ago, I remember I went to a movie with someone, and we're watching and we're going through it. And I'm like, and then something happened, and I was like, oh, someone called in a bomb threat. And he like looked at me and like, whatever. And then sure enough, they're like, oh, there's a bomb threat. He's like, you've seen this movie before. I was like, I haven't. He's like, there's no way. He's like, he just could not believe that I knew there was a bomb threat. But there's a certain amount of like when you watch enough story and you study story long enough, there's a certain amount of like there's these like cues and there's these things where things become kind of obvious. And I'm always impressed with a show, just side note, when they take all those most predictable ideas and they throw something in that was totally unexpected. Because then I'm like, oh wow, you got me. Because like
Yeah.
most of the time, like if I watch like, and I'm not trying to harp on it because they do a very commercial and very standardized thing. But if you watch CW, for example, you watch their shows, a lot of it is very predictable. It's just kind of like, okay, I know what's going to happen. I know how this person's going to react. I know what they're going to do. I know how this all plays out. For a young person who's maybe in their teens, who's watching that show, which is really their target audience, all that stuff's new. So it doesn't really matter. For them, they're going to kind of like accept that. But for someone like myself, who's, older and been around for a while, those types of things are just, they just become predictable and boring. My point is though, is I'm watching these shows that are sometimes predictable and I almost don't even have to pay attention. I still know what's going on. And I'm like, is this really fulfilling me? Is this really adding anything to what I'm trying to do here?
Yeah.
And honestly, when I'm honest with myself, I'm like, no, it isn't. And I think that we need to be mindful about when we talk about what's important for ourselves and what's a priority, that we're not just doing the thing that's comfortable. For me, I realize like, yeah, I can justify watching a show and say, oh yeah, I'm working on my craft. I'm studying, when I'm like, come on, man, you're not. And I think you got to be able to call yourself out on that too, because you can slip away into this, into this kind of like, how do you put it? Just doing what's easy and doing what you're kind of, it's not building anything. And I think you got to kind of check in with yourself and go like, well, what am I really trying to do here? What's the real win here? And don't bullshit yourself, be honest with yourself about it. I get caught in it. I think everybody does to some degree, but you really got to try not to bullshit yourself. I think that's like such an important part of this, is like, what would really be a win? What would actually make a difference or matter or contribute, because there's lots of stuff you can do out of comfort that you tell yourself it contributes and it matters, but it doesn't. So that's something I would like to bring in, just in this late stage of this conversation. But it's like, yeah, look, at the end of the day, doing what's important is about you. It's about fulfilling you and making sure you're full, and so you're not walking around your life like this kind of empty cup that's always trying to get something to fill itself up. Whereas if you just fill yourself up with stuff that actually matters, with substance, you're going to go about life and you're going to have you're not going to be susceptible to buying into like bullshit stuff that just does nothing for you. If you're empty and you got nothing going for you, you're going to be more susceptible to like putting crap just to kind of fill the void, because you're just empty, because you're not doing anything to give yourself any sustenance of creative, fulfillment or artistic fulfillment, whatever you want to call that.
Yeah. 100%. And I really love the analogy of the cup, because instead of looking for someone else to fill up your cup, the way in which you are engaging with your life, which is the actions that you are, the choices and the actions and the direction that you are making for yourself are the things that fill up that cup, which, actually I didn't mention this, but as part of like the sort of I know I keep talking about this, but, as part of the 3 wins thing, one of the things about it is that like a win has to be something that I'm in control of. It can't be dependent upon somebody else, right? So, and even if there is a win that has to do with someone else, right? Sometimes it's just like, okay, like, the win is if I get in touch with this person, like send out that message, like establish some sort of open up that communication. Sometimes that's what the win is. I can't control about whether they're going to respond to me. I can't control about whether they're going to maybe do the thing that I've asked of them to do. I don't have control over that. But the win was the communication on my end, right? It was that reaching out, just as an example, right? But that's a way of filling the cup. The win has nothing to do with what comes out of it. The win has to do with my ability to do something. The action that I am currently in this moment capable of taking towards basically leading more of the life that I want.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. That's a really important part of it. I had someone tell me once that most people don't achieve their goals and dreams because they make it dependent upon someone else. And that's the number one reason why most people will not live the life they want, achieve the goals or dreams they want or anything. So, people who are truly goal oriented and successful at it, they look at what they can control and they do as much of what they can control as possible. And they put like kind of our last conversation, they put a bit of a leap of faith that by doing the work, by doing the things that they can control, that if they do enough of it, the right things will come together when they need to come together. And that part of faith is like, you got to look at it in terms of the longer game. Like with goals and things that are in your control, you can control them immediately. You can do them now. You can make them happen just by putting the effort in and doing the right things. They're very practical in a sense, right? Whereas the faith element, like, that's something that's a bit of a longer game. So there's a certain amount of things you can control. Like, for example, if you were going to start a business, you would say, okay, I need to get a client. Okay, you got to get a client. How many people do you got to call and talk to and message before you can get a client? Right now, if you contacted one person and you got a new client, that's 100% success rate. That's great. But just remember that client still came out of faith. Whereas you might have to call 10 or, maybe 100, right? And, the thing is that there's a certain amount of work that you can do to get the result. But if you do the work, you have to put faith that if I do the right work, that the result will come. And, like actors who audition, right? Like they say, if you're really, really good, like you're really good, you're like top form, you'll tend to book, what is it? Like, I think it's like 1 out of 10, they say on average, right? Yeah. Now, some people do a little bit better, some not. Now, if you're good, if you're professional and you're doing maybe even commercials, you'll book 1 out of 20. That means you got to go to 20 auditions before you even get one role. Some actors don't even get 20 auditions in like a month. Sometimes they don't even get 20 auditions in 3 months. So you're looking at over the course of the year, if you book 2 or 3 roles, you're a good actor. Like you actually done a pretty good job. And you go, well, I only got 2 roles this year, or only got a role this year. I mean, hey, look, in the odds of things, you might have actually done pretty well, And so then you got to look at it and you got to go, okay, well, how do I either increase my odds? How do I improve upon it? But you still don't control it, right? I mean, Ted Whittle, who is on the podcast, great podcast episode. You guys should definitely check it out. After he won, I think it was a Gemini, he didn't work for 2 years or something like that. Right. So you get this best actor award and you just don't work, and people, this whole idea that you can make it, that you're in control of things you're not. It's part of the thing that we all have to let go of a little bit. And your job is not to worry about the result. It's to worry about keeping yourself full and to do the right things and have the right practices in place. We have the law of practice, the law of discipline, for a reason, because part of it is just getting yourself into a state of momentum and fullness, which is going to help you get the results. But yeah, I think a lot of people talk themselves out of doing a lot of things because, like, well, I won't get the result anyway, or whatever. And it's like, well, look, the result is not the point. The point is doing the thing, do the thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's really interesting the directions that this conversation has taken. What you just said made me made me think of a class I just recently had with a few of my students. Like you're familiar because you've taken my class before, Brandon. But like one of the things that I love, especially in the early stage of the work, is that it doesn't go anywhere. Not on its surface, right? But it's designed to not go anywhere. Like the repetition, right? Like you're just repeating after each other and noticing different things that are happening in each other and in the moment, and just that's all that's going on. It doesn't go anywhere. There's no end point to it. There's no the only end point is when basically I tell them to stop, right? But there's nowhere to go. And it's just about engaging in a process for its own sake, which is, really what the best artists, in whatever area that they are, that's what they do. That's what they consistently do. They're not pushing for any kind of a result. They're not pushing. It's just like, well, I'm engaged in the process of doing this thing. And so many actors will tell you, and I was recently watching one of those like Hollywood Reporter roundtables from a few years ago. I was just like, oh, that's an interesting group of actors all assembled to talk about all of it. And all of them were pretty much in agreement I was watching, one of the actors was Adam Driver, and it was like a round table because I think it was all Oscar nominated actors from that year, and Adam Driver had been nominated for Marriage Story.
Oh yeah,
which like if anyone's seen Marriage Story, I think it was a Netflix movie, and there's one scene in it that's just it's a great movie, but there's this one scene that just everybody was talking about this fucking scene in this movie because it was amazing. And they're talking about emotional result, getting to actors always trying to pushing for emotional results and stuff like that. And this one particular scene is just like raw. It's such an emotionally raw scene. And Adam Driver was saying, like, if I'm trying to get there, it'll never happen. Like I'm just engaged in what are the things that are happening here, and the words that I'm saying, like really connecting to these words that I'm saying to this person, and completely letting go of any idea of what this needs to be, because otherwise you'll just completely shut down. And so that's just another example of someone who's just they're engaged in their primary area of importance was on the process of what they were doing, as opposed to it having to reach some sort of emotional level or peak. And the results were an Oscar nominated performance.
Right.
Like but that wasn't what his focus. That's what in the moment when he was giving his performance, it wasn't what was important.
Yeah, and what I'm kind of picking up from this is like sometimes I think we make things important that aren't important and aren't in our control. Like process is in your control to some degree. I mean, you could argue about the nuances of process, but like there's a way in which you can go about things that you have control over. But how that turns out and what happens and how you emotionalize out of it as an actor, for example, or, whatever, that stuff you don't control. I have a writer in one of my courses. I work with writers and actors and video game developers now and all sorts of creative types. But one of my writers is quite a good writer, but there's some interesting things I find with his process. For example, was like believing that they can control certain things about their writing. And I find it kind of fascinating to watch them work through it. And I feel they've come a long way because early on, they had this kind of idea that, and maybe it's still there a little bit, but this idea that you could use these tools and these techniques and these tricks. And if you do them, you can get this result. And there's a little ounce of truth to that. There is a little bit of truth, but not as much as they were thinking, in my opinion. Mm. There's a problem when you start to believe you can hack results in a way where you not only close yourself from the possibility of a different result, which could be a much better result, but you actually you limit yourself from what can happen. Like there's a whole thing with process that is like it exists in the unknown. You know, the art exists in the unknown. And I do think as a writer, there's a lot of technical skills that you can use and a lot of understandings. Like writers who have this type of understanding and they understand how this works, they have a capability that I think is quite interesting and quite profound. But if they rely too much on their tools, you can kind of see their writing. It's like acting, you know, you can see them using the tool. So like, for example, when I was watching that movie, which I won't out in this moment, when I was watching that movie and I was like, oh, it's a bomb threat. That's the writer showing me their work. You know, it's like, I knew that's coming because there's a very predictable thing. Right. And now I think with when you open yourself up to a different possibility, let me give you an example of this. You know this, Evan. I had a script for a little while that, you know, was kind of getting the big budget was kind of coming together for it. There was like a little movement for it. It was kind of exciting. And one of the things about that script that kind of, I think, was appealing was there was a particular character that nobody kind of saw coming and kind of being a certain way. And the thing is the way I wrote this character, I wrote them like believing as I was writing them that they were this certain way. But then as I got through the story, I was like, wait a minute, what if the whole time this character was actually this? And I was like, fuck it, let's just do it. And the thing is, what really worked about it is it comes out of, it totally justified because it totally makes sense in this context of the story, but you never saw it coming because I didn't know I was doing it the whole time. Mm-hmm. I was writing him like he was really this way. And then when the bait and switch comes, it was something I discovered partway through the script. So all the way they're written, there's no giveaways, there's no tells that they're in on it. Because when I was writing that character, you have to understand, when I'm writing them and they're speaking their dialogue, because I believed that they were really doing what they were doing, they believed what they were really doing. So then when it turns out that they were lying, what their lies were so believable because they really at the time believed their lies. But in the context of story and how it all marries together, it's quite surprising and shocking and kind of, you know, so yeah. My point is that with art, you can think you know what you're doing, and that's fine, but never be so certain. Never be so certain that you know for sure this is how it is and this is how it's always going to be. Keep like 1 foot out to be like, well, if at any point I feel like dramatically changing this story and I want to throw it on its heels or whatever, like you can just do that, you know. And there's a certain amount of like, you know, I think the point is like to bring it back to what's important. The important thing is that your process is authentic and true, and that you do what you are trying to do fully and do it wholeheartedly, and don't worry so much about the results. the results will come, and they will come in sometimes the most surprising and interesting and fascinating ways. And to bring it all the way back full circle, to go back to the marriage story, I think I know the scene you're talking about. And yeah, it's like one of those scenes where it's like, did they know that was exactly how it was going to play out and what it was going to look like? I mean, I doubt that, but they might have had an idea, but it isn't until, all the important things come together and then you go, okay, there we go. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I it's one of those things in any art form. I think that if you're not continually running into some surprises, then you probably need to rethink your approach. I think any good art is like should be constantly surprising you. In big ways and little ways, right? Like you have to be surprised. Otherwise it's no good.
Well, and
That's my thought.
I think so too. I think that's what the audience wants, to be a little bit surprised. They love that. We go to movies for that. I mean, that's why movies are such a big thing, because we want high concept. We want new stuff that surprises us and, makes us look at things a little bit differently. Right.
Great comedy is that way too. Great comedy is actually all about surprise.
Right.
Because what's the joke other than some sort of like a punchline that you weren't expecting?
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, how's your beer?
Good, man. Good. Yeah, I didn't have any worries about this one because I've had this one before recently, and I didn't have a different one in the fridge. So I was like, well, I've got this one, and I'm not gonna be too upset about that. So I'm drinking the Mountaineer Pilsner from Whistler Brewing Company, and it's great. It's real tasty. Real tasty.
Nice.
How about you?
I'm having a brew from How Sound Brewing, and it's a Belgian pale ale. It's very tasty. Yeah. Anyway, there's the can if you're on video. But no, it's good. I got it for last week as well. I was kind of like cross between this beer and another beer, which, if you want to hear about that beer, just listen to the last episode. But then afterwards, I'm like, oh, let me try this Belgian. I was like, that's really good. Got to do it on the podcast. So there you go. So way to go. How Sound Brewing. Yeah, I don't know. Let's wrap this baby up. I mean, I think we pointed out a few things like, making what's important and kind of sorting that out. But I don't know. Do you have any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, just for me, I guess it's to reiterate these things of I think I want to come back to a word that came up that I don't think we spent a lot of time on, but let's do that now, which is joy. Like what is something that brings you joy in your life that you're not making important, right? That has been put off for too long, is sitting off in a corner somewhere within yourself, collecting dust and basically just starting to rot, and it's starting to rot inside you, right? And look, all it needs is a little dust off, pull it out of the closet and and get to work, like and it'll come back to life for you. It's important. Like that's the name of this podcast. This is important. Stop telling yourself that it's not, that there's no time for it, that it's just like, there's like, how long are you going to let that thing or things fall by the wayside? Like, what is your life gonna look like continuing on if you continue to neglect that? Like, what is that life for you? What like that's there should be something alarming if there's nothing that you are doing consistently, practicing, as we've been talking about, on a consistent basis, things that bring you joy, things that are joyful for you to do in your life. If you're not if you're not doing things that make you joyful in your life, if you're not creating things that make you joyful in your life, then you're not living a life of joy. So I don't know how much more of an argument I could make other than that as to why that thing that you've forgotten about, that you've neglected, is the most important thing that you can do.
That hits home. Yeah, it hits home. I think that's, those are good questions. And I maybe something that we didn't really talk about, but maybe this is a nice way to wrap this thing up. But I think like mental health and just general well-being is, it's a big thing in this time. I think how we're doing as people in our lives and just how we feel and how we're functioning through life is, it's a much more important element than it ever was. And it's a time where mental health is being talked about more. We're beginning to realize that mental health is not just about, people who maybe have some issue or they're like, unstable, but it's just mental health in general, for people. Like being mentally and emotionally healthy is a really important thing in a culture that's essentially thriving. And I think that what's important to remember is that when you have time for leisure, when you have time for a certain amount of freedom of expression, and you have this life you can essentially do what you want with, it's really, really important that you do something with it of substance, that you do something that matters, because that is what is going to make you mentally and emotionally and psychologically strong. When I was going through my hardest time, and I've talked about this many times on the podcast, when I was going through my hardest time in life, I wrote every day. I wrote every day through that. And it was like, there were days where I'm like, what's the point? What is the point of even doing this? What am I doing this for? And there is something grounding about it. Every time I wrote, even if it was just to try and get out some emotions or some thoughts or something like that, it was helpful. It helped me process. It helped me work through it. And I think for people who, maybe if you're going through a hard time, I think having an outlet, having a creative outlet that you make important during that time, the importance is not necessarily what results will come out of it. Because while I was writing and I was saying, what's the point? I was thinking, what result could ever come of this, right? Like, this is pointless. But there was a point in it, the process of it, and we kind of talked about that during this conversation. So I'll go back to that, put faith in process, and the process of doing things that you love, the things that you care about, and making them important because they fill you up and they give you sustenance. They give you emotional, mental, and psychological sustenance that when you go through harder times, you're going to have something that's yours. Because they can take everything from you, like, and I mean, not like, some entity out there. I just mean like the whole world can change. You can lose your money. I have. You can lose the people you love. I have. You can lose things and count on. You can lose your job. You can lose a lot of things that are giving you meaning and value in your life and giving you some type of, sense of identity. But no one can ever take the sustenance that you build inside yourself. No one can ever take the art that you put time and energy into creating and developing, and the artist you took time to create and develop.
Thank you for listening in on our conversation today. We hope you found something helpful that you can carry forward with you. Head over to our website, wayoftheartist.com, for more free exclusive material and learn about the show. If you haven't already, please support us by subscribing to the show, sharing it with people you know, and keeping compassionate, creative conversation going.